Hi and welcome back to my channel, and a warm welcome to all of you that have recently subscribed, because this week has been kind of crazy when it comes to people subscribing to this channel, and that's just very much fun, so welcome to you all. Summer is kind of weird on YouTube. It's like people tend to go more outside during this time and spend less time in front of their computer, and that means that YouTubers usually notice quite a big fall in their statistics. So it's especially fun that so many people of you watched my latest video here instead of being outside in the sun. Or sun, as we say in Norwegian. Also, filming videos in the middle of summer is kind of challenging. You have to go on vacation and spend time with family and friends, and it's just harder to film videos. So that means that I've already talked about many of the books that I've read this month, which I released earlier this month. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the books I've read the past 2 weeks. So enjoy. And we're starting with a book that I've saved for summer because I felt that was the vibe, and that is Ro by Handbag. This directly translates to 2 words. The one is row, as she does in this boat, and also in English, calmness. So it's a very fitting title for this one. And this was sent to me by the publisher because I'm guessing because I really enjoyed her An Ode to Darkness book about darkness and being alone in the dark. And I did really enjoy this. But it's quite unfair. So the whole thing is about the author rowing the Sognefjord. And this is where I grew up, so naturally I have a lot of emotions tied to this book. All the time while reading it, I was thinking about growing up there, like the beautiful fjord, the beautiful mountains, how it is in summer. It is sort of a diary of her rowing day to day, where they are, what she thinks about, and like she leaps from theme to theme outside of rowing, but it's all a bit connected to the place or the boat. So some shipbuilding tradition, or a rowboat, is that the word? Rowboating traditions. Also being from a place, belonging to somewhere. When I grew up, where I grew up, my family had moved there, and it's a big difference between the people that have lived there for a long time and the people who moves there. They do not entirely belong, and some might say that if you haven't had 4 generations that have been there forever, you really aren't from there. For a person that has now lived in Oslo for the last 8 years, now I'm a person from Oslo, which doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't really matter to me either. If there's one thing this book might be missing, it's sort of a bit of resistance, because it's all quite fine and dandy, and even though sometimes the weather is too bad and it's kind of dramatic, it's not dramatic enough. But I still really enjoyed this. Also, the concept of rowing this fjord is something that I could have thought about doing myself. I probably won't ever, but still something I could have enjoyed. And now for something completely different. It's How to Be Invisible by Kate Bush. So this one I saw in a store recently, or a couple of months ago, and I thought, I have promised myself to read more books from artists, and that's what I'm going to do. I didn't browse through the book because I didn't have the time. I saw it in a window, then ordered it online because that's too convenient. And so, yeah, I just like the cover. I think it's boring, but there was something there that just spoke to me. Anyway, I thought this was going to be kind of a memoir. It says selected lyrics featuring a new introduction by the author, and it's basically just lyrics. I should have known, but still disappointed. I don't know if that's allowed to say. In the first few pages, as I said, she has an introduction, and I loved the introduction, and I was so disappointed when continuing reading. So that's all on me. Yeah, it was an interesting thing to do, just because I haven't read any poetry ever, so reading lyrics will be much of the same. And I found that where you knew the songs from before, it was much more powerful reading them because you had the melody in your head. And for those lyrics that I didn't know the origin to, I listened to some of the songs in the beginning while I was reading, so just listening to music and reading, that was better, but at one point I gave up and tried reading just the lyrics for themselves, but still, that just made the songs I knew the most the best. So I think I learned something when reading this, and that's pretty much that poetry isn't for me. She is a brilliant artist, just not the musical side, but also the lyrical side. In the introduction, she talks about the song Cloudbursting and where she got the title, and that was from another book. So now I have a Kate Bush recommended book on my list, so that's great. Earlier I read one recommendation from Patti Smith, so reading a book recommended by Kate Bush. Maybe this could be a future video in about 20 years. We'll see. When it comes to the structure of this one, I couldn't quite grasp the concept. I just recognized some songs like together where they have some of the same words, so I could read the one, then the second lyric, and then, oh yeah, a sheep was mentioned in the first one as well. But that's about it. I gave this 2 out of 5, but I'm still kind of happy that I read it, only because I've fulfilled my own promise to myself that I would read more books from artists. So it's something. My next read is one of the most interesting I've had. Not the read itself, but the significance it's had on the Norwegian public and like the Norwegian train of thought, the Norwegian way of thinking. And that is A Fugitive Crosses His Tracks by Axel Sandemose. I know that some of you out there have been really eager for me to read this novel, so I'm really happy that I got around to doing so. So why is this an important Norwegian novel? It came out in the 1930s and it describes this society where they have the law of Jante. I don't know if the law of Jante is something that's known outside of Norway at all, but it's sort of 10 Norwegian commandments, or after the book was published, it became like the Norwegian spirit or a Norwegian guidebook for how you might have to behave. So I'll read the 10 commandments that this place in the book describes. So the town is called Jante and they have 10 laws. And that is, you're not to think you're anything special. You're not to think you're as good as we are. You're not to think you're smarter than we are. You're not to imagine yourself better than we are. You're not to think you know more than we do. You're not to think that you're more important than we are. You're not to think you're good at anything. You're not to laugh at us. You're not to think anyone cares about you. And you're not to think you can teach us anything. There are probably thousands of examples I could have given, but the first thing I think about when I think about the law of Jante is rich people traveling to Switzerland, moving there because of tax reasons, and then blaming the law of Jante because they can't really succeed in Norway or they can't really be special. Yeah. Don't ask me questions about the practice of this law in Norway, but it's really interesting, and that's why it was interesting reading this novel. So the actual novel is about a person killing someone. He starts out with saying, I've killed someone, and then he goes through his childhood looking for clues of why he killed the person and talking about this society that's called Jante. And basically this was really, really boring. It went all over the place, it's really fragmented, and the only interesting thing about this one is like the significance it's had on the Norwegian public and the killing in the beginning. Because I thought when it started out, I thought, well, this might be more interesting than I imagined, but it really wasn't. So a terrible read, but an interesting one. The next book is one that I picked up because of the cover, and it's Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This was nominated for the Booker Prize last year, and I just really, really love this cover. So basically that's why. It's set in Ireland in the 1980s, in the weeks leading up to Christmas, and people are miserable for several reasons. This also, I would say, was kind of fragmented. I couldn't in my head glue it all together. It's based on a society that have been, and towards the end it sort of explains how this is all set up. I won't talk that much about it because it's really, really thin, and me trying to explain it more will just spoil it for you, so I won't do that. To me this was too chaotic, even though it's probably wasn't. I just was a bit bored, and couldn't really figure it out, but when the ending came, I was sort of, and reading about the historical things, I was sort of, I wish that I read this book once more, because it just feels wrong getting that information so late. So, a bit irritated, I would say. Probably if I tried reading this novel again, it wouldn't be for me, but now it will still shine in my shelf, so there's something very vain to be said about that. Since I'd already read a Norwegian classic this month, I thought why not two? So then I started reading Pergeint by Henrik Ibsen. And I have to start by asking you, it's like growing up in Norway, you learn that if only Henrik Ibsen had written in English, he would have been a superstar. And I don't know if that's true. Have you seen this name before? And I hope it's now in focus. Is Henrik Ibsen someone you know, have heard about? Is Pergeint something you've heard about? Because he's reckoned as one of our biggest, writers of all time. That's naturally why I picked this one up. I knew the music for this play more than I knew the book and what's in it, because that's written by Edvard Grieg. You've probably heard 2 songs from this play, and it was just fun reading about where this music originated, which is a very weird approach to a book or a play or a lyrical play that this is. It's really apparent that this is a lyrical play because you have a lot of poetry, but it has sort of a direction. It's not just poetry for the poetry, which is my feeling sometimes, and I find that cool. My main motivation for picking this up was understanding the references and the music, and it's just mentioned so much when you're talking about Norwegian books or Norwegian plays or Norwegian culture. It's difficult to escape Henrik Ibsen. Pergeint is the name of the main character, and it starts out with him making a fool of himself, stealing a bride, and then escaping up in the mountain, visiting the Mountain King. So it's just him being an irritating person. Here also I'm afraid of spoiling, so I'll just summarize this with saying that Pergeint is just a fool, an irritating and irresponsible person doing those kinds of things throughout this play. Of course it's a play, so it's a short read and not difficult to get through at all. It is highly entertaining because he does a lot of stupid shit, and now I know a lot more about him. So for me it's a good thing. And I also have promised myself to read more plays, since they're fast-paced and enjoyable. And maybe I was affected because I also did something stupid towards the end of July, and I was reading The Year of the Hare by Arto Paasilinna. So this is my 3rd read from this author. The reason why it's stupid is because I've read 2 other books from Arto Paasilinna, did not enjoy those that much, even though they had everything going for them. So why did I read this one? Well, it's because this is his most famous one. And I thought, well, I have to read this one because reading those 2 other ones and judging his whole career without reading this one while it's standing behind me in my shelf seems kind of silly. But I should have left it, shouldn't have read it. It starts out with 2 people driving a car. Then they hit or almost hit a hare. One of them goes on adventures with this hare, and it's a bit all over the place. I feel like every book I've read this month have been sort of chaotic. It's the feeling of having read 2 sentences, and if you didn't pay complete attention, you're now reading a completely different novel and you don't know where to go. Or at least that was my feeling. Also, it lacks a clear goal. It's just absurd, weird. I like the absurd, but he makes me not like it. And it's hard to put the finger to it. But I saw this one new word, picaresque or picaresque. I couldn't really find a translation, but it says something like it's a novel consisting of shorter episodes rather than one story or a totality. And this is something that bugs me a lot. I want one story going in one direction. I don't want a lot of sidetracks going in a lot of sidetrack directions. It just have to become something at one point. And this didn't. Or I can't really say it didn't, but it didn't for me. It's hard to explain. So these are the books that I finished these last 2 weeks. If you're interested in my other reads for this month, you can check out my video that I did earlier. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!